What happens when an entertainment legend meets the most controversial panel on daytime television? You won't believe what unfolds when decades of Hollywood experience collides with morning show drama in the most explosive way possible. Last night's episode of The View delivered the kind of raw, unfiltered confrontation that has everyone talking, and what started as a routine celebrity interview quickly spiraled into television chaos that nobody saw coming. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of music's biggest icons goes head-to-head with the hosts in a battle that left the studio audience stunned and producers scrambling behind the scenes. The morning started like any other at the View studios, with production assistants buzzing around, making final preparations for what was supposed to be a light-hearted interview promoting Cher's latest projects. The legendary performer, known for her decade-spanning career and outspoken personality, had agreed to appear on the show to discuss her upcoming concert tour and recent philanthropic work. What none of the producers anticipated was how quickly the conversation would veer into dangerous territory, transforming a routine celebrity segment into must-see television that had viewers glued to their screens. As Cher settled into the guest chair, her signature confidence was immediately apparent. Dressed in a flowing black ensemble with her trademark long hair cascading over her shoulders, she exuded the kind of star power that comes from 5 decades in the entertainment industry. The hosts, seemingly prepared with their usual talking points and pre-planned questions, appeared ready for what they assumed would be another predictable celebrity interview, filled with promotional soundbites and friendly banter. The initial minutes proceeded smoothly enough, with Whoopi Goldberg opening the segment with standard pleasantries about Cher's impressive career longevity and recent achievements. The conversation touched on her upcoming tour dates, her continued relevance in an ever-changing music landscape, and her thoughts on working with younger artists. Cher responded with her characteristic wit and charm, delivering the kind of entertaining anecdotes that make for good television ratings. However, the atmosphere began to shift when Joy Behar decided to steer the conversation toward more politically charged territory. With a knowing smile that suggested she was fishing for controversy, Joy brought up Cher's history of political activism and her frequent social media commentary on current events. The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, asking about how celebrities should use their platforms to address social issues. But anyone familiar with The View's tendency to create divisive moments could sense the trap being set. Cher's response was measured but firm, explaining her belief that artists have not only the right, but the responsibility to speak out on issues they care about. She spoke passionately about her decades of advocacy work, from supporting LGBTQ+ rights to championing various humanitarian causes. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed significant social changes throughout her career and felt compelled to use her influence for positive impact. The tension in the studio became palpable when Sarah Haynes jumped in with a follow-up question that seemed designed to provoke. She challenged Cher's approach to political commentary, suggesting that celebrities who speak out on political issues often lack the expertise to contribute meaningfully to complex debates. The question carried an underlying condescension that didn't go unnoticed by either Cher or the studio audience, many of whom could be heard murmuring in disapproval. Cher's demeanor visibly changed as she processed the implications of Sarah's question. Her posture straightened, and her famous smile took on a sharper edge as she prepared to defend not just her own activism, but the broader principle of free speech and civic engagement. The legendary performer had clearly encountered this type of dismissive attitude before, and she wasn't about to let it slide without pushback. The exchange that followed revealed the growing divide between Cher's perspective and the host's apparent agenda, as Cher articulated her belief that experience, compassion, and genuine concern for humanity were more valuable than traditional political credentials. The host seemed determined to paint her as an out-of-touch celebrity lecturing ordinary Americans. The studio audience, initially excited to see their favorite icon, began to sense the uncomfortable direction the interview was taking. Sunny Hostin then entered the fray with what appeared to be a coordinated attack, questioning whether Cher's privileged position in Hollywood had disconnected her from the struggles of everyday people. The implication was clear and insulting. suggesting that decades of charitable work and advocacy meant nothing because of her celebrity status. The question revealed the host's strategy of using Cher's success against her, turning her achievements into liabilities in their narrative. The studio atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Cher realized she was facing not a genuine interview, but what felt like an ambush designed to diminish her credibility and paint her as an elitist. Her years of experience in the entertainment industry had prepared her for many challenges, but the calculated nature of this attack seemed to catch even the seasoned performer off guard. The audience could sense the shift from entertainment to confrontation, and the energy in the room became electric with anticipation. What made the situation even more volatile was the hosts' apparent coordination in their line of questioning. Each follow-up seemed designed to build on the previous attack, creating a compound effect that pushed Cher further into a defensive position. The legendary performer, known for her quick wit and refusal to back down from fights, was clearly becoming frustrated with the hostile environment she found herself navigating. The breaking point was approaching as the hosts continued their systematic dismantling of Cher's credibility, and viewers could see the storm clouds gathering for what would become one of the most explosive confrontations in The View's controversial history. The stage was set for an unprecedented clash between entertainment royalty and daytime television's most provocative panel, and what happened next would leave everyone talking. The moment of truth arrived when Alyssa Farah Griffin decided to escalate the attack with a question that crossed every line of professional courtesy. With a smug expression that betrayed her intentions, she leaned forward and delivered what can only be described as a calculated insult disguised as journalism. Cher, don't you think your constant political tweets and public statements make you seem desperate for relevance in an industry that's moved past you? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and the studio audience collectively gasped at the brazen disrespect. Cher's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her famous composure cracked as she processed the deliberate cruelty of the attack. And for a moment, the camera captured the raw hurt in her eyes before it transformed into something far more dangerous. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to a level that anyone who knew her recognized as a warning sign. The legendary performer had been insulted by critics, rivals, and enemies throughout her career, but this felt different, more personal, and infinitely more calculated. The hosts seemed to sense they had struck a nerve, and rather than backing down, they doubled down on their assault. Whoopi, who had remained relatively quiet during the earlier exchanges, suddenly jumped in with her own pointed comment. "Look, we're just saying what a lot of people are thinking. Maybe it's time for celebrities of a certain generation to step back and let others have the spotlight." The condescending tone and obvious ageism in her words sent shockwaves through the studio audience, many of whom were Cher's contemporaries. The veteran entertainer's response was swift and cutting. "A certain generation? You mean the generation that actually earned their success instead of getting handed a talk show for stirring up controversy?" Her words hit their target with surgical precision, and the host's expressions revealed they hadn't expected such a direct counterattack. Cher wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was going on the offensive, and her decades of experience dealing with industry politics were about to be unleashed. Joy Behar, clearly rattled by Cher's pushback, made the fatal mistake of trying to justify their behavior. "We're just having an honest conversation about celebrity activism and its effectiveness. Isn't that what journalism is about?" The attempt to frame their attack as legitimate journalism only further enraged Cher, who recognized the manipulation tactic for what it was. "Journalism." Cher's voice rose with incredulous anger. "Is that what you call this ambush? I came here to talk about my tour and my charity work, not to be insulted by people who wouldn't know real journalism if it bit them on their collective behind." The audience erupted in applause, clearly siding with their beloved icon against what they perceived as unfair treatment from the hosts. The applause seemed to fuel Cher's fire, and she continued her devastating counterattack. "You want to talk about relevance? I've been entertaining people and fighting for causes that matter for 50 years while you've been sitting behind this desk creating fake controversies for ratings. Don't lecture me about desperate when your entire show depends on manufacturing drama." Sarah Haynes, perhaps sensing the interview was spiraling out of control, attempted to regain some semblance of authority. "Cher, we're not trying to attack you personally. But you have to admit that sometimes celebrity political commentary can be. She never got to finish her sentence because Cher cut her off with the kind of righteous fury that only comes from someone who has been pushed too far. Can be what? Inconvenient for your narrative? Threatening to your little echo chamber here. Cher's voice carried the full weight of her legendary status as she systematically dismantled their credibility. I've used my platform to support veterans, fight for LGBTQ+ rights, and help countless charities. What have you done besides sit here and tear people down for entertainment? The hosts found themselves in unfamiliar territory, facing an opponent who refused to be intimidated or silenced. Sunny Hostin made a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative by suggesting that Cher was overreacting to legitimate questions. We're just trying to have a mature discussion about mature. Cher interrupted with a bitter laugh that sent chills through the studio. There's nothing mature about ganging up on a guest and then trying to gaslight them when they fight back. This isn't a discussion. It's a hit job, and frankly, I expected better from women who should understand what it's like to be attacked simply for having opinions. The accusation of betraying sisterhood hit particularly hard, and the host's defensive body language revealed. They knew they had crossed a line. The studio audience was now openly supporting Cher, with several people standing and applauding her refusal to be bullied. The energy in the room had completely shifted, and what had started as the host's attempt to diminish Cher had backfired spectacularly. Alyssa, clearly frustrated that their coordinated attack had failed, made the mistake of trying to double down. One final time. Well, if you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be commenting on tough issues. The condescending smirk on her face as she delivered this line proved to be the final straw that would push this confrontation into legendary territory. Cher's response was immediate and devastating. She stood up from her chair with the kind of dramatic flair that had made her a star, her eyes blazing with an anger that had been building throughout the interview. Tough questions? You call personal attacks and ageist insults tough questions? Her voice carried across the studio with the power of someone accustomed to filling arenas. And every person in the building could feel the shift in energy as the entertainment icon prepared to deliver what would become the most memorable moment in The View's controversial history. The hosts realized they had awakened something they couldn't control, and their expressions revealed the dawning understanding that they had severely underestimated their guest. The woman standing before them wasn't just a celebrity being interviewed. She was a force of nature with 5 decades of experience dealing with far more formidable opponents than a panel of talk show hosts. And she was about to demonstrate exactly why she had survived and thrived in the entertainment industry for so long. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks to come, as Cher prepared to deliver the kind of authentic, unfiltered response that would expose the host's tactics and leave viewers with no doubt about who the real villains were in this ugly confrontation. The legendary entertainer's voice cut through the studio like a blade, carrying 5 decades of wisdom, pain, and hard-earned respect. You know what? I've dealt with real adversity in my life. I've been dismissed, underestimated, and attacked by people far more powerful and intelligent than anyone sitting at this table. But what you're doing here isn't journalism. It isn't entertainment, and it sure as hell isn't women supporting women. The host sat in stunned silence as Cher continued her devastating takedown, her words gaining momentum like a force of nature. I've survived the music industry when women were treated like decoration. I've built a career that spans generations, while being told I was too old, too outspoken, too everything. And now you're going to sit here and lecture me about relevance? About knowing my place? Whoopi attempted to interject with a weak, "Now hold on," but Cher wasn't finished, and her legendary status commanded the room in a way that silenced even the most vocal host. No, you hold on. I came here as a professional courtesy to promote my work and connect with fans. Instead, you turned this into some kind of gladiator arena where you thought you could tear me down for your ratings. Well, congratulations, because you just showed your true colors to everyone watching. The camera operators, sensing television gold, kept their lenses trained on Cher as she delivered what would become one of the most quoted moments in talk show history. You want to know about desperate? Desperate is attacking a guest who came here in good faith. Desperate is trying to destroy someone's reputation because you can't create compelling content any other way. Joy Behar made a final, futile attempt to salvage the situation. Cher, if you would just calm down and let us explain. The patronizing tone was the absolute worst thing she could have chosen in that moment. Cher's eyes flashed with an anger that had been building not just throughout this interview, but throughout decades of being told to calm down, be quiet, and know her place. Calm down. Calm down. Cher's voice rose to fill every corner of the studio. I am calm. This is me being calm while you systematically tried to humiliate me on national television. You want to see me not calm? Keep telling a woman who's been fighting battles since before you were born to calm down. The studio audience was now on their feet, applauding and cheering as their beloved icon refused to be silenced or diminished. Several people could be heard shouting, "Tell them, Cher, and you go, girl." The energy in the room had completely shifted, and it was clear that the audience's sympathies lay entirely with the legendary performer. Sarah Haynes, looking increasingly desperate, tried one last manipulation tactic. "We're sorry if you feel we've been unfair, but stop right there," Cher commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded stages around the world. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me with that if you feel nonsense. You know exactly what you did. You planned this ambush, you coordinated your attacks, and now you're trying to make me look crazy for defending myself." The hosts exchanged panicked glances as they realized their usual tactics were not only failing, but backfiring spectacularly. Cher had turned their own weapons against them, exposing their methods for the entire viewing audience to see. "You know what the real tragedy is here," Cher continued, her voice now carrying a note of genuine sadness beneath the anger. "You're all women. You should understand what it's like to be dismissed, to be told your opinions don't matter, to be attacked for being strong. Yet here you are, doing the same thing to me that men in boardrooms have been doing to women for decades." The accusation hung in the air like a verdict, and the host's inability to respond spoke volumes about the truth of her words. The studio audience continued their vocal support, creating an atmosphere that made it clear who they viewed as the victim and who they saw as the aggressors. Sunny Hostin made one final, desperate attempt to regain some measure of control. "Cher, we never intended for this to become personal." "Intended?" Cher's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You asked me if I was desperate for relevance. You suggested I was out of touch with real people. You questioned my right to have opinions. How much more personal did you want to get?" The devastating logic of her response left the host speechless, and the cameras captured their uncomfortable silence as they realized they had been completely outmaneuvered by someone who had spent decades navigating far more treacherous waters than a daytime talk show. "You know what? I'm done here," Cher announced, her voice carrying the finality of someone who had reached the end of their patience. "I came here to be a good sport, to promote my work, and to connect with fans. Instead, you try to turn me into your latest victim for ratings. Well, I'm not your victim, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend this was anything resembling professional journalism." As Cher moved toward her purse, the hosts seemed to realize the magnitude of what they had done. The optics were terrible. The audience was completely against them, and they were about to lose their guest in the most public and humiliating way possible. Alyssa made a last-ditch effort to salvage something from the wreckage. "Cher, please don't leave. We can start over." "Start over?" Cher turned back to face the panel, her expression a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "You can't unring a bell. You can't take back the insults, the condescension, and the coordinated attack you just launched. What you can do is think about whether this is really the kind of show you want to be associated with." The legendary performer gathered her belongings with the dignity of someone who had weathered far worse storms and emerged stronger. "I've been in this business for 50 years, and I've learned that you judge people by how they treat others, especially when they think they have the power. Today, you showed exactly who you are." As Cher walked toward the exit, the studio audience erupted in the loudest applause of the entire segment. People were standing, cheering, and some were even shouting words of support and encouragement. The contrast between the audience's enthusiastic support for Cher and their obvious disapproval of the hosts could not have been more stark. The camera followed Cher as she paused at the studio entrance, turning back for one final moment that would become iconic in talk show history. To anyone watching who's ever been bullied, dismissed, or told to sit down and shut up, remember this. You don't have to accept that treatment. You have the right to stand up for yourself, to walk away from toxic situations, and to demand better. That's what I'm doing right now. With those words, Cher walked out of the studio, leaving behind a panel of hosts who had been thoroughly exposed and humiliated by their own tactics. The studio audience continued applauding long after she disappeared from view, their message clear. They had witnessed something special, a moment when integrity triumphed over manufactured controversy. The hosts sat in stunned silence, faced with the wreckage of what had been intended as a ratings-grabbing ambush but had instead become a masterclass in how to handle bullies with grace, strength, and unwavering dignity. In trying to diminish a legend, they had only succeeded in revealing their own limitations and proving exactly why Cher had remained relevant and beloved for 5 decades. The episode would go down in television history as one of the most spectacular backfires in talk show history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating someone who had survived and thrived in the entertainment industry by refusing to be anyone's victim. Cher had walked into their trap and turned it into her triumph, leaving viewers with no doubt about who the real professionals were in that room.